Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And just a reminder, we have two shows tomorrow. And watch the times, though, the next couple of weeks, because USA, North America, has changed the clocks for the summer. France, UK hasn't yet. So over the next couple of weeks, there'll be some adjustment of times, bearing in mind people's time zones. It was Brian, my guest today, who reminded me that the clocks had changed there, but not here. Anyway, today we are looking at the 106th Division and specifically the 423rd Infantry Regiment. My guest has written a book entitled Boys, Just Boys, and he takes time to join us to share more. Welcome to World War II TV, Brian.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
So I always like to ask new guests how you define yourself. We have some absolute, professional docents of history. We have professors, we have amateur historians, we have researchers, human interest. Do you have a label you like to give yourself with regards to your study of World War II?
Not really. I, from a young child, I was always intrigued by history, particularly the Civil War. I had a great grandfather who fought in the Civil War, and then eventually, probably through my sons, I developed an interest in World War II. And that's what really started all of this is planning a trip over to France and Belgium to follow the trail of Easy Company of the 101st Airborne, the Band of Brothers. In planning the trip, I got a lot of knowledge about World War II, and then I met a man who was in the 106th, and that's what triggered all this.
I mean, we were just talking before going live, is that despite the fact the Battle of the Bulge is incredibly famous, the largest ground battle the American military ever fought in, people's knowledge drops off a cliff beyond the 101st in Bastogne, perhaps Joachim Piper on the New York Northern Shoulder. And there's all these other units that take part, and even the boundaries of how you define the Ardennes kind of gets a bit blurry, because the Ardennes forest kind of moves into Germany and Luxembourg, and there's so much more to that campaign that there appears at first glance. So we're going to dive right in. So Brian has come armed with a PowerPoint. It's over to him, and folks, kind of as always, fire away with questions and comments. But I think we'll learn a lot from this, because we've not covered the 106th before. So over to you, Brian.
So just a little background here. As I mentioned, I met a man in planning a trip named Fred Parks, who told me a story, and I ran with the story. For those of you who are familiar with a man by the name of Kurt Vonnegut, I wrote a book called Slaughterhouse 5. He was in the 106th Infantry Division. He was in the 423rd, and Fred Parks went to Dresden and was housed at building number 5 at the slaughterhouse with Kurt Vonnegut. A book was written about that incident by a son of a veteran who was there also, and there was a mistake. This mistake involved Fred Parks, who lived in my town, and I spent 4 or 5 days researching it, reached out to the author, and I was able to confirm for Fred this was him that they were talking about in the book, and I just thought there was a fascinating story there to tell. This book is about all the men. I didn't want to focus just on Fred. Fred's the main protagonist in the book. And I didn't want it to be about Kurt Vonnegut, but for all practical purposes, the book, it's Boys, Just Boys, the biography of a World War II infantry regiment, is the true story of Slaughterhouse 5. So in researching that, I got to know a lot about the 106th, and that's what I'm going to give you is an overview of the 106th Infantry Division. It was the last infantry division created during World War II. Let me find my arrow here. It was commanded by this man, Alan W. Jones. He was a career military man. He joined the service 1917 or 18. He was not West Point. He did not participate in World War I. He traveled the world, but this was his first command. So in March 15th of 1943, just east of Columbia, South Carolina, at Fort Jackson, that's where the division was officially organized. It was initially made up of 10% of the cadre from the 80th Infantry Division, which at that time was at Camp Nathaniel Bedford IV. So they took 10% of the sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and some privates, and shipped them to Fort Jackson. They naturally, the officers and the sergeants had been through basic, and those privates had been through basic. So now they're receiving, starting on March 15th, they start receiving new recruits from around the country who have to be trained. By the end of March, the division was about at its TO&E, or the Table of Organization and Equipment, and they started basic training. Went through all the normal basic training. I was in the service. They did all the same things I did: the marching, the firing ranges, throwing hand grenades. They even did some urban warfare. There was a place at Fort Jackson called the Nazi Village, where they did house-to-house combat. You can see there's a picture of Goebbels' post office. All these buildings had their names. So they finished after 14 weeks, the end of July of 1943. So this is the makeup of a standard infantry division in World War II. You have the headquarters company, you've got the Divardi Division Artillery, you've got the 155 millimeter howitzers, that was the 592nd. And then you have how the regiments fight. 3 regiments, they fight as a combat team. You had the 422nd, 423rd, and the 424th. And each one of them had its own 105 millimeter howitzers. And then each regiment had a company of combat engineers, and each regiment had a company of medics. So now starting in, let me go back a screen. Starting in the summer of 1943, the Army is in need of replacements to go overseas. And they start pilfering these men who, and boys who have their basic training, and they send them to replacement units, primarily Fort Meade, Maryland, and then ship them overseas. Between the summer of 43, and I'm going to jump ahead to the summer of 44, over 6,000 trained men from the 106 were shipped overseas to replacement units. So the 106 finishes 1943 training at Fort Jackson. In the middle of January of 1944, it leaves Fort Jackson by vehicle and it goes to near Murfreesboro, Tennessee. There's 21 counties surrounding Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and they participate in the Tennessee maneuvers. This was the 5th one. There have been obviously 4 prior ones. There were 3 other infantry divisions there. There were dozens and dozens of tank battalions, anti-aircraft battalions, artillery battalions, engineer battalions, all participating in these war games. There were about 80,000 men. And just as a side note, everybody knows combat's dangerous. You don't have to tell anybody that. But just keep in mind that during the Tennessee maneuvers, over the years, I believe it was not quite 3 years of maneuvers that went on, over 200 service members died in training. While the 106 was there was a truck that went over a bridge with 18 soldiers on it. They died. The night before the 106 was done training, a boat was crossing the Cumberland River. It was swollen, and it capsized and 21 men drowned, just like that. So, we all think about how combat is, but training in the military is also very dangerous. Tennessee maneuvers, where this took place, the Army had absolutely no idea. This is by the end, it's March of 44. Army had absolutely no idea where the 106 was going to go. I believe the Army knew it was going to go to Europe, had no idea where it was going to go. D-Day hadn't happened. The push across France hadn't happened. But what I'll talk about later also, it is really ironic how not only the terrain, but the conditions, the mud, the ice, the snow, the rain, mirrored where the 106 was going to ultimately be placed in the front line. And if you have any questions,
the comment I was going to make, Brian, is I'm glad you mentioned about the fact they had the urban warfare training, because there's that kind of cliched idea that all the units that were committed to the ETO towards the end of the war were were green and hopeless and not up to the job of the veteran divisions like the 1st and the 3rd who've been battling for 2 or 3 years. But as we've covered on this channel a couple of times, they are definitely receiving the benefit of the wisdom that has been learned in the earlier campaigns, and that has come through into the training programs, the training regimes, the doctrinal approach to things. And so there's an argument to be made that the units that field, in the latter part of 44, early part of 45, are actually as good, if not better, because they've certainly kept up to date with the latest means of fighting the war.
Yeah, there were no shortcuts that I could see. I sent a transcript to a professor at Florida State University who ran the World War II Institute that was at Florida State, and he was really surprised at my research and what I wrote about the training, because even he had this misconception that they weren't well trained. You got to remember, before the invasion of Europe, sure, there were those like the 1st Infantry Division that went into Sicily. Some of these units had a lot of experience, but the 101st Airborne, even though it didn't have combat experience prior to D-Day, I don't know how many years did it train, like nearly 2 years of training. So the 106 went from basically not far off from basic training to the front line. So from they spend the rest of January, all of February, and most of March in Murfreesboro playing the war games. It was very successful. I know the 423rd did not have one death, and I am not aware of any man from the 106th who lost their life, which says a lot about the training and leadership. So, like I said, I know no man from the 423rd died, and I'm not aware of any man from the 106th who died during the Tennessee maneuvers. So the end of March, they head north to just south of Indianapolis, Camp Atterbury. It was a relatively new camp that opened up in 1942. It's about an hour south of Indianapolis. There it continued its training. Now, a subchapter. Here's Camp Atterbury. You can see Camp Atterbury. I can't control. You can't see my arrow. Can you see my arrow moving?
No, we can't see a mouse. No.
Okay.
No.
So down, quite a ways down towards the end, you see Edinburgh. That's where Camp Atterbury is. That rock, I took that picture of that rock outside of Camp Atterbury. There were Italian POWs there. They carved that rock, put it there, I think, 1943. It's still there today. A subchapter of the 106th was the Army Specialized Training Program. As I said, 6,000 men were taken from the 106th, and they needed to replace these men. The Army in 1942 developed a program called the Army Specialized Training Program, or the ASTP. The idea was to develop lieutenants, officers in the area of engineering, medicine, and foreign language. The Army saw a need for that. So they developed this program. Virtually every university or college in the United States had an ASTP program, 227 of them. The Army needed officers, the college needed students. Most of the college-age students who were able-bodied were all fighting the war. So the colleges welcomed them. They had the infrastructure and the instructors. There was about 2 companies at each of these universities. The program was initially set up for 150,000 men. By the December of 1943, there were about 145,000 men in the program. Now, there were 2 ways to get into the program. If you were in the service and you were not yet either not 21 or not 23, you would apply, take a test, and if you qualified, they sent you to a program. You already went through basic training. You were sent to a college, put into a unit. They also had high school students could join. Anybody who was at least 17 and not 18 could take a test, and if they qualified, they would be sent to the program. Now, keep in mind, they're 17. Their parents have to sign for them to join, even though they're going to college. It was a 3-year program. Many of these boys elected to go that route, thinking, okay, I'm going to spend the next 3 years in college. They went through, it was just like an ROTC. They were in uniform. They marched. This is a picture of James Donini. He was one of the 17-year-old boys from Ohio who went. You can see he's got the shoulder patch of the ASTP. There's a colored version of it. He went to, it was either Auburn or University of Alabama. At the time, it was Alabama Polytechnic University, was what Auburn is today. So they've got about 25,000 of these 17, 18-year-olds in the program. By the end of December of 43, the Army realizes it needs more boots on the ground than these students in the seats, and the program's canceled. And where do they send these boys? I don't know of any who went to any unit other than infantry. So the 106th Infantry Division receives 1,500 of these boys from an ASTP program. And I'll tell you, I keep saying boys because I make reference to these. That in the book, I talk about it. There was an older man in the book. I say older, he was 27. He was Frank Vanderlip Cosby, who's from New York. He's a very wealthy family, went to Princeton undergrad, Cornell master's degree. He was working on his PhD at the University of Wisconsin when he joined the service, vacation in Lake Placid, New York with his family. And I have personally, I purchased his letters off eBay that he correspondence with his mother. And he wrote a letter to his mother saying, you know, these kids, these boys, they're training for war, but in their spare time, it's just like at Lake Placid when we ran around, they're boys, just boys, enough to make angels weep. So that's where the title of the book came from and why I refer to them as boys. And
just worth mentioning, there are some very famous alumni of the ASTP: Henry Kissinger, Bob Dole, Mel Brooks, Kurt Vonnegut, Gore Vidal. I'm sure there's some others. Mel Brooks went to an artillery unit as an observer, so he didn't go to infantry, but that's one I can think of. But yeah, it was. And if you read the memoirs, we're going down a massive rabbit hole of some of these guys. They were sort of advised that they wouldn't be doing proper kind of soldiering. They'd be more involved in like the rebuilding of Europe. And don't worry, you won't be. It wasn't. They weren't lied to, but the people who brought them in were quite selective about what truth they told them, which is interesting.
And to that point, I didn't get into it, but that was the idea too. It's my understanding that the Allies had realized at this point that they were going to win the war.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to happen after World War II what happened after World War I.
Yeah, exactly.
They wanted these officers, these engineers, to be able
to civil affairs, diplomat. Yeah, that they wanted these people with essentially with brains to go in there and do a management job after the war. And as you're about to explain, most of them ended up holding an M1 in the fighting. But yeah, that's
There's one, and just to allude to this, I believe we're going to have a follow-up program on POWs. One of the men was a young kid named George Thompson from Wisconsin, and after he was captured, his father writes this scathing letter to the military about this kid's vision was like 2300, and he goes, "How in the world can you put him in an infantry unit?" And so, yeah, they had no idea that they were going to be getting into this. What they were signing up for. So the division finishes its training at goes through the normal training it receives. It gets up to full strength, and it leaves Camp Atterbury and heads east to Boston. Is in the upper right-hand corner. I'm thinking you can see my arrow. Boston's in the upper right-hand corner of this map. Just south of it is a town called Taunton, and near Taunton is Camp Miles Standish. That's where they go by train. They're at Camp Miles Standish for about a week. Then they are shipped overseas. This is the Queen Elizabeth, and it's Battleship Gray. For those who don't know, it's a sister ship to the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary was in service as a cruise liner. They were building the Queen Elizabeth. Never took a cruise before the war. The British government commandeered it and used it for as a troop carrier. So the 423rd got on a train, went to Hoboken, New Jersey, took a ferry across the Hudson River, and boarded the Queen Elizabeth. It took 5 days to get across. The 4 artillery battalions got on the Aquitania in Boston Harbor and went overseas, and the rest of the division got on the No, the rest of the division got on the Aquitania. The artillery battalions got on a ship called I believe it was Stanfield, and they went to they went to Scotland, near Greenock, Scotland. Up there near Glasgow, they then took a train and they all went down to just west of London. They were in the Cotswold area. Many of you probably know there weren't any bases large enough to house an entire artillery or infantry division. So they were in a lot of little towns. You know, they were in Cheltenham, Stow-in-the-Wold, in many little areas. I think there was a racetrack, a race course in Cheltenham. That's where 3rd Battalion was. They stayed there through the month of December or through the month of November, did light training. Some of the men went to London. I've heard and read about their trips to London. So the end of November, they start moving. They go to Portsmouth, where they board ships, dozens and dozens and dozens of ships it took to ship the division. They go to Le Havre, land in Le Havre, miserable conditions. In one, an anchor broke. It was just horrible. You know, one of the things that men complained most about, particularly on the Queen Elizabeth and on these boats, was apparently the food prepared by the British cooks was a little too greasy for them, and it caused them a lot of nausea. Just the stories of them getting sick on the ships. But they land at Le Havre, and then they're trucked to a camp, C60, or what's called Camp Red Horse. I don't know, Paul, if you're familiar with it. It's, and let me look, I have it written down here, in Lindenbeuf, Lindenbeuf. It's about 40 to 45 miles to the northwest of Le Havre.
Okay.
And this is a wet and muddy trip. They're in the back of trucks. They put them in a pasture where it's, it's so wet they can't even get their tent stakes into the ground. They're stealing hay and straw to put in their bottom of the tents. They're getting in trouble from the farmers. So they spend about 5 days there, and then they are trucked across France. They go to the southern end of Belgium, and then north to just south of Liège. And if you look in the map here, south of Liège, north of Luxembourg, where Belgium juts into Germany. If you can see that, I'm going to go to my next slide. And that's where the 106 is. And I'm going to go over this. You can see St. Vith there on the left hand of the map. So now they're there for about 2 days, and starting on December 10th, they start swapping out with the 2nd Infantry Division. The 2nd Infantry Division is covering this area. This area was originally taken by the 4th Infantry Division. The 2nd Infantry took over, I believe it was in October or November, and now they're pulling the 2nd Infantry Division out and replacing it with the 106th Infantry Division on the 10th. And if you look at the blue lines that I have there, the top blue line is approximately where Losheim is. If you go to the second blue line, and then between the second and the third blue line is where the 422nd was placed on December 10th. That line in between them, that road, that's the Schnee Eifel, a small mountain there. Starting with the third blue line to the fourth blue line is where the 423rd was placed on December 11th. And then if you look down to the last two, that is where the 424th was placed. Now, keep in mind, these men were all told, nothing's going to happen here. It's the quiet zone. The war will be over by Christmas. There's no way the Germans are going to attack. I placed a photograph, and there you get some idea of the woods. It's really woods unfamiliar to us in the States, where you have these conifers with no low branches. That's my son and a gentleman by the name of Carl Worters, who's a Belgian who.
Oh yeah, I know Carl. Yep.
Carl will do anything for a 106 veteran or any World War II veteran, and family member gives tours. This was in 2013. He and my son Chris there found the ends what hold the mortar tubes. those were those were for
clover leaves. Yeah.
80 millimeters. So there's the front line. Now keep in mind the Bulge is somewhere when it started, like 80 some miles. The 106 had 27 miles. By the book, by the field manual, an infantry division, standard infantry division, should have about 5 miles in that terrain, with 2 infantry regiments in the front line and 1 infantry regiment in reserve. All units of the 106 were in the front line, with the exception of 1 battalion, and that was 2nd Battalion of the 423rd, where if you go back there to St. Vith, just to the north of it were 2 towns. One was Bourne and one was Medell. So right from the get-go, it was not a good situation. And if you go between the top 2 lines, that was the 14th Cav Group's area. Yeah. A Cav Group, which I don't think is known for defensive fighting, it had 7 miles to guard here, and the Losheim Gap. It had 2 troops, the 32nd and the 18th. Now it had all of its troops except for one. If you go down to the south where you see Blythe and Winterscheid, about where the blue line is, the Winterspelt, there's a town called where the blue line is called Winterscheid. That is where there was 1 troop, B troop of the 18th Cav. Also keep in mind that was the left flank of the 423rd, 424th. However, there was 1,000 feet or 1,000 yards, 1,000 meters between the 18th Cav Group and the 424th without any defenses. To the south of the 106 was the 28th Infantry Division. To the north was the 99th. They were all part of Middleton's, 8th Army Corps. The 4th Infantry Division was to the south of the 28th Infantry Division.
And just by the way, folks, and Brian, we did a show on the cavalry groups. I just put the link in the sidebar. William Nance did that a couple of years ago. So if you haven't seen that one about the defensive role, as Brian said, the cavalry groups did, that's the one to watch. And then Bill Nance went on to do the fantastic show about General Simpson of the 9th Army. He's a great guest. So if you haven't seen that one, go and check it out. Thanks, Brian.
Good. So here's this is 2nd Battalion, Colonel Deschenaux in the middle there. That's what that was the 422nd. Here's Colonel Cavender in the middle. That was the 423rd. These are taken at Camp Atterbury. And in the middle here is Colonel Reed. He was the 424th. So here's a map that kind of a neat story to this. I told you the commander of the 106 was Alan W. Jones. Well, his son, Alan W. Jones Jr., was a lieutenant in the 423rd. This is a map he drew when he was at the War College in, I think, 1951. And that shows you can see where the Schnee Eifel is. It shows you the Losheim Gap up top there. If you look north of St. Vith, you can see where he has Bourne. He doesn't list Medell there, and he shows the 422nd Battalion, 422nd. There's a series of about 5 maps that he drew of this. And I'll show you. And I'll give you another. The Army realizing it needed young officers. Many people aren't aware, but for 3 years, West Point abbreviated its curriculum. The first year was to 3.5 years, and then 2 years, it was 3 years instead of the 4. And Alan Jones was in the first graduating class of 19. He graduated the summer of 43 in 3 years. And he was in another unit, and he requested to go to his father's unit. There's Alan Jones. This is my son Chris and I. That was Colonel Jones at one of the reunions of the 106. So here is the Schnee Eifel, and you can see the 422nd. All 3 battalions of the 422nd are in the front line. Then you have 2 battalions of the 423rd. Now I've got on my screen, it says slide. I can't see it, but I believe you can see where it says Brandscheid, just south of A and B of the 423rd. That was held by the Germans. And Brandscheid is elevated. It could see over. And if you go to the northwest of Brandscheid, you see Blythe. Blythe was anti-tank company, cannon company of the 423rd, occupied Blythe, and it's in a sugar bowl. So Branchide can see over it. Bouquet, just north of Branchide, is where the headquarters was for the 423rd. And if you go to the north, east, you see Schlossenbach. That was the headquarters of the 422nd. This is, you can see, even small for my eyes, that's Blythe there, the white one in the middle. This is the headquarters company. I took this picture in 2013. I was just over there in December for some of the ceremonies of the 80th, and I went by the house again where it was housed. This is 22. So here's another overall map. You can see the 99th to the north, the 106th, the 28th to the south. So December 16th, between 5 and 5:30, the artillery barrage begins. Lasts for about 45 minutes, and the Germans start to attack at 6:30. And I will just tell you, and I'm going to go to another map to show you the route of the Germans, but on the north of this map is where the 422nd was, and that line starting from the right that goes down in an angle to the down to Branchide, that's the Schnee Eifel. The 422nd and 3rd Battalion of the 423rd really did not receive a whole lot of artillery, if any, because the Germans would have had to have attacked uphill through the woods. It hit at the corner down there, north of Branchide and south of Bouquet, where 1st Battalion was. It hit Blythe very hard, and it hit Schonberg very hard. At about 6:30, as I said, the attack started. There are radio reports coming into Blythe, and there's house-to-house fighting. There's urban fighting going on in Blythe. This is Captain James Manning. He was the commander of Cannon Company. Germans had taken over some buildings. He was taking his troops, going house-to-house fighting, and a German sniper shot and killed him the morning of December 16th. So the battle goes on for the rest of the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, and now we're on the 19th. That's the area that the 423rd and the 422nd fought. Very small area. And let me just tell you this also. I'm going to go back a little bit. I told you the 4th ID took over this front line, established this front line. The 2nd ID then came in. The 2nd ID didn't like the positions of the units. Keep in mind, this is the Siegfried line. So these Americans are occupying the rear of the Siegfried line. The Germans have this mapped very well. The battalion, the regiment that the 422nd replaced down in the south had requested and had already moved back towards the Our River. So the 424th was back further. It's my understanding that the plan was to eventually move the rest of the division back further, but it hadn't happened yet. So this is the area they fought in. The Germans took Blythe by the end of day one, and they're pushing up towards Schonberg. And if you see at the north where Awe is, the Germans went around the 422nd, went through the Losheim Gap, pushed the cav units back by the end of the first day of the battle, and were occupying Awe by the end of December 16th. Now, I told you about 2nd Battalion of the 423rd that was back in Medell and Bourne. When the barrage started, they were put on alert by about the time it got dark on the 16th. They were at Schonberg, and they sent a roadblock on the road from Schonberg to Andler to the north, and on the road from Schonberg to Blythe to the south. However, Germans are coming into Awe, and they get orders about 10 o'clock to get to Awe to push the Germans out and help get the 589th Field Artillery Battalion out. It was being attacked, frontal assault. The 2nd Battalion of the 423rd fought valiantly that night. The next day held off a German assault. But in the meantime, the Germans had gone even further to the west and are coming down from the north to Schönberg. The Germans' plan, I can't see my next map. So let me go to the next map. So here is, this is another map by Alan Jones. You might be able to see the 422nd up north there. This is, trying to see, my date is cut off. This is at the end. Let me go back a map, Paul. I apologize here. So here, let me go to this map. So you can see, many of you probably know, the Germans' goal was to get to Bastogne, to the road network at Bastogne, and St. Vith, which is at the north part of the Bulge there, also had a road network. The Germans' goal was to get to St. Vith by the end of December 16th. So the rest of the 16th, they fight. The 17th, there's more fighting over towards closer to Schönberg, in between Blyth and Schönberg. On the 18th, they reorganize. The plan is the 422nd and the 423rd are going to attack Schönberg the next morning. They get ready to attack. The plan is to attack at 10 o'clock a.m. 9 o'clock, the Germans open up with an artillery barrage, and it decimates the 423rd. Although the 422nd had made it back to the 423rd, this is a map. You can see down here at the bottom, towards the bottom, it says the 423rd with the three. The plan was the 3rd Battalion of the 423rd was going to attack along the road from Blyth to Schönberg. The 1st Battalion to its right and 2nd Battalion behind it in support. It got blocked up. 2nd Battalion tries to go around. It goes around and it gets mixed up with the 422nd. So now 2nd Battalion, 423rd is with the 422nd on the 19th. The other 3 battalions are by themselves and independently. Each of those regimental commanders, about 4:30 in the afternoon, elected to surrender their units. I believe it was 1st Battalion of the 423rd made it to within 800 feet of Schönberg, and it was just being pushed back by artillery, anti-aircraft fire. Armor had arrived by this time. So as I said, here is the route that the Germans were going to take. Back to the 423rd and the 422nd, there were about 7,001 men from the division who were captured, about 400 some odd men from the 424th, over 2,700 from the 423rd, about an equal amount from the 422nd, most except for the division artillery battalions were captured. Engineers, the 333rd medics, they were captured. Let me go to the next map. So again, here's that. So here is St. Vith. This was on the right, on the left is a ceremony that took place there in December, but you can see St. Vith. It was virtually, this picture was taken towards the end after the Allies bombed it. As I said, the Germans' goal was to take St. Vith by the end of December 16th. They still hadn't by the 19th, by the time the 422nd and 423rd were captured. The 424th made it back and helped in the defenses of St. Vith. And it wasn't, and the 422nd was attached to the 7th Armored Division. General Jones, he's in St. Vith, commanding the division. Not only did he have his division wiped out, most likely his son was either captured or killed. He had a medical issue. Some speculate he had a heart attack. So he was relieved of command on December 22nd, and this is all understandable. I couldn't imagine. And he was replaced by General Perrin, his assistant division commander. The division fights on, and it was on the 22nd or 23rd that the Germans finally get St. Vith. So this fresh, young division that had no combat experience, and the 106 hasn't been treated too kindly in history. You know, I have the book here, you know, Omar Bradley's book, A Soldier's Story, which I believe is one of the best books of the overall picture of World War II. It saddened me when I read it that he just, you know, he says 2 regiments of the 106 were wiped out. He would have been nice if he would have said the 422nd and 423rd, but it hasn't. Many of these men were embarrassed that they were captured. And I said the 424th was then attached to the 7th Armored Division on the 24th. It fought with the 7th Armored Division. All of the men who survived from the 422nd and 423rd were put into the 422nd. You know, on December 19th, when these other units were captured, the 424th was the last effective fighting unit of the division.
Worth just jumping in and saying that our show with Greg Fontenot on the 7th Armored at San Vith a couple of months ago, he was actually quite, you know, pretty complimentary about the 106th guys that ended up part of that 7th Command. He used that same photo of San Vith, and you know, you're going to probably explain this later on, but you know, we talked about the training the division have had. They've, you know, there's nothing to fault their training. They've had all that preparation, but you know, when you're showing those maps as you did about their arriving in there, I'm thinking that as well as the division has been trained to do the basic job of soldiering. For example, the G2 department, you know, the intelligence, you're moving into an area that you've never been, you've barely just got off the trucks from the Havre area, and you're arriving in an area on the Belgian-German border where the place names change. It's been coming up in a sidebar. You'll drive along a road, and there's Germany one side of the road, Belgium the other side. And Ian was in the sidebar saying he was staying in a hotel there, and his cell phone coverage was switching from Germany to Belgium as he moved from the kitchen to the bedrooms, etc., etc. And you're moving in there and you're trying to put a defense in an area you have just no knowledge about. If only the 106th and the regimental guys could have had borrowed some intelligence officers from other units, or had some Belgian liaison to move into an area like this with that terrain and that road network and try and make sense of it without any prior knowledge that's an uphill struggle.
So, you know, there were many reports, I'm sure you've heard it, of the men on the front line of the 106 saying, hey, listen, we hear tracked vehicles on this next hill across this little valley from us. And the word was, that's the Germans playing pre-recorded sounds of tracked vehicles. The other thing is civilians were moving back and forth. And I was just in St. Vith, and who knows what their allegiance, you know, you have Flemish, French as languages in Belgium, and that area of Belgium is German. You had many civilians moving back and forth. I'd heard a story of these nuns that would walk back and forth. And number one, they speculate whether or not they were truly nuns. And even if they were, that they were giving information of the positions of the men of the 106 all along the line. So I'll also mention, I told you I was there in December, the Manhay, Manhay is a small town over there. The 424th helped liberate that town. And I don't know if any of you have been to Bastogne. I haven't, for the ceremonies around in December where they have the reenactors. The one in Manhay, they say, rivals it. It was unbelievable, the hundreds and hundreds of reenactors and vehicles that were in Manhay. It's just, you know, and as an American, you don't understand whether it was in 2010 when we were in Normandy, or we see this here, the appreciation that the French, the Dutch, the Belgians have for the sacrifices that the American soldier did. I'm going to tell you a side story quick on that note. When I was over there, I was there with many sons or grandchildren of veterans of the 106. We were in Manhay. There was a man there who had one of the German, like, duck, the swimming vehicles. I don't know the name of them.
Schwimmwagen, yeah.
Schwimmwagen. He was in uniform. And when we told him, when he became aware of who this man and his son were, that they were the son and the grandson of a German soldier who fought in the Bulge, he started crying. He said his dad was a German soldier who fought over there, and he just was full of tears, and he had so much joy and appreciation to meet these guys. And so I can tell you, Americans appreciate what everybody does over there.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you this, the 106, keep in mind, the Standard Infantry Division, just over between 13 and 14,000 men, 8,663 casualties from the 106. There were 14,600 who died in battle. There were 1,246 who were wounded, and 7,001 were captured. And I talked to Paul before this. Hopefully I'll do a follow-up to this show on the POW aspect of it. From the 423rd alone, over 100 men died in battle, and over 100 died after they were captured by Allied strafing, Allied bombing, starvation, execution, illegal shootings.
And how is it when you're going down a rabbit hole myself, when you're researching a unit like this that had a bad day at the office? I don't mean to be trite with that statement, but they had this, German armored attack coming up, confusion, misinformation, bad intelligence, etc. And they're dealing with this, and thousands of guys get captured. We're all used to talking, or some of us here are used to talking to veterans who are proud of their service and proud of their stands. And I'm thinking of the Arnhem veterans. Although they were defeated at Arnhem, they had that pride of what they did there. What is there a consensus? You said some of the 106th guys felt bad and shame. How did they just kind of come to terms with the fact that they were in this position? So, and their division, as you said, Bradley wrote about them pretty negatively.
So it's such a spectrum of, there's one veteran in particular who thinks it was a conspiracy theory that the Americans knew exactly what they were doing, putting the 106 there, that they knew the Germans were going to attack, that they wanted the Germans to use their resources, that the war would have took longer. There are other veterans who, the local guy who I got to know, Fred Parks, he told me when I interviewed him, several times, said, well, I never told anybody this. You don't know how many men I interviewed. I interviewed over face-to-face over 40 men from the 423rd, at least 24 more over the telephone, more than that of men from other units of the 106, and time after time. It was, well, I never told anybody this before. I felt privileged that they told me. But Fred Parks told me when he was a POW, he tore his shoulder patch off. He didn't want anybody to know he was in the 106. After he was, it wasn't until about 1995 that he started opening up about it and felt better about what took place.
Wow.
And Fred lost, he went from about 140 pounds to 185 pounds as a POW. So and this is where I always tell people on my tours, there's times to have your analytical hat on, there's times to have your emotional hat. And with the analytical hat, of course, you can see 80 years on flaws with the American defensive plan. Of course, we can see that a lack of intelligence and things like that is causing this to combine with a pretty strong big initial German advance. And then there's the emotional response, which is, as you say, these guys have just been thrust there. They're just kids, boys, as you say from the book there. They're thrust in this environment. They didn't choose their first engagement they were going to be part of. It wasn't some units were able to come ashore, maybe in Normandy in Italy, and have a few weeks of kind of gradual introduction to the battlefield. I'm thinking of the 84th Division, for example, who had a couple of minor-ish engagements before they went up to kind of Geilenkirch and got their feet wet. And this, for one who's sick, you're straight. I mean, you're to use the skiing analogy that I sometimes do on the show. You're going straight off piste to the advanced slopes, so to speak. No soft introduction. You're right bang into it, and your first day is receiving a German counterattack. You've got to be empathetic to these individuals. Yeah, there's so much to, So the first man to die once I got to the front line was a man by the name of Furman. I can't think of his first name, but he's walking out on the morning of December 13th, the day after the 424th. They finally officially took over the front line. He's walking out of the bunker. Keep in mind, the Germans know exactly where these bunkers are. They can pinpoint them. He walks out of the bunker. The Germans lob a mortar in, and he's killed. There were a few other deaths prior to the battle, but to your point about thrown into battle after just a few days in the front line, in Normandy, those guys a lot of them had no combat experience before they went in there, but they were told. They knew what they were getting into. They were saying, look to your left, look to your right. One of you isn't going to make it. As opposed to these guys that were, as the 422nd guys, the thing is they were swapped man for man, gun for gun. And as the 422nd is coming out, say, hey, enjoy the vacation. The war's going to be over by Christmas. And
there's a big difference between assault waves or even follow-up waves in an amphibious operation, because at least you know what the plan is. At least you know what you as a company or down to platoon and squad level are supposed to do. Whereas in an environment like the Ardennes, the Allies have been on the offensive for at least a year before December 44, generally speaking. So suddenly you're not dealing with a plan that you've put together. You're having to react to the German plan, and no one's quite certain exactly what the German plan is. You explained it brilliantly with the maps there, but on those first few hours, when all you can hear is German armor coming down a road towards you, don't know what the plan is, and it's very difficult to react to a situation that you can't be precise about. And I think, although there are casualties in an attack, as I say, at least you know what the plan is. In a defensive role like this, you're dealing with a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, it's I can't imagine the shock they went through.
Yeah.
So so the battle happens. The 424th, for the most part, survives. It's attached to the 7th Armored Division. And eventually, by April 14th of 1945, the plan is to reconstitute the entire division. And they're down at an area, and I wrote this down, Saint Jacques de la Lande. There's an airfield there, and that's where the 106 is headquartered. Over 6,000 new recruits come in. Some of these are from the States. Some of these have volunteered from other units, medics or cooks who said, I'll go infantry. And they have a ceremony there. This was Manhay, Belgium. I missed a slide here. This was Manhay. These are all, so the two men, or the man on the far right with the cap on, that's the grandson of a man from the 423rd. The one in the red jacket, his father was in the 423rd. His father was captured. The lady over the right shoulder, the soldier, Kathy, her grandfather was killed the morning of December 16th. So these are all real. I'm the only one who's not a relative there, standing in the back. So this goes back to what was taking place. The 106th Division was in the quiet sector, took a shock from the Nazi breakthrough. I went over how many men were killed. This newspaper article is from the 21st. And another aspect that people don't think about in this day and age, you have 24-hour news cycles, you have a cell phone. The battle starts on the 16th. By the 17th, word gets back. By the night of the 16th, the 17th, word gets back that there's a battle going on, a major battle. No information whatsoever who's involved. Time goes on, weeks go on. These men are captured. Families are getting no word. December 28th, there's an intercepted German report that the U.S. newspapers pick up saying the 106 is decimated. It wasn't until January 11th that families started getting confirmation from the military that their loved one was missing or died or was wounded. And from then on, there was sporadic, if any, information. This is an article from December 22nd. And again, this is censored. It doesn't mention anything. 2 lost American units stalled Nazis 2 days by Thermopylae stand. So it does warm my heart that somebody realized that, they compared the 106 to the Spartans holding off the Persians at Thermopylae. But again, there wasn't any information in this article. So again, that just goes over the objective. I covered most of this. So this is what I talked about. This was the Reconstitution ceremony. All the men you see here are survivors of the units of the 106th Infantry Division. What you don't see on the other side are the 6,000, the entire division that they are going to march and hand the guidon to the reconstituted units.
I just realized I went through Saint-Jacques-de-la-Lande last week. That's that weirdly. I knew I recognized it. And it's on the road back. I went to Rennes for Saturday night, which was my birthday. And it's, just south. And I just realized I stopped there. There's a monument to Patton's Third Army going through there. So as soon as you said it, I thought that triggered something. There's so many names of a similar sound in France. But yeah, I went through there last week. It's a small world, crazy.
Yeah, there's an airfield there, and I believe this took place at the airfield.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I'm going down enough classic World War II TV rabbit hole now, but the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery is located in Rennes, and there was a crash on, I think I'm going to say October the 8th, 1945. It was definitely October 45. So afterward, it was a short Sterling bomber converted to transport, and it was on its way back to the UK, and it tried to land at this airfield, and it had problems, and it just plowed into the ground, and everybody was killed, including, and this must be absolutely unique in World War II. I was talking to Neil Cherry, who was on last week, 3 married couples, which is extraordinary. This is obviously what was happening. Is after the war, units, British our military. One was a New Zealander, one was Australian. I think people are gathering again from in service. The women were in the service, and they were gathering, and they were kind of basically going back home because the war is well and truly over on a transport, and they plow into the ground. And unique that 3 married couples in this crash, but that must be the same airfield. It's amazing how small world it is.
Yep. That's it. So from there, the division did some occupation duties. Some of it was in Germany. They guarded POWs. In September of 45, they got word they're shipping home. They headed west back to Le Havre, where it all started, and they shipped back on many different ships. I know, again, the 423rd is my area. I think it went home on 3 different ships. But the entire division went home. It went back to New York Harbor, to Hoboken. I think it was Camp Kilmore was a camp. And on October 2nd of 1945, it was deactivated. Less than 31 months, the entire division. And one of the biggest research tools, I spent many weeks at St. Louis. Every day, every company in the Army, there's 20 companies in a division. Every day, every company does a morning report. And a morning report will say if anything's changed, anybody comes in and goes. I went through 19,600 morning reports just for the 423rd on microfilm. And, I put it in the book that at the very end that deactivated was basically the last words of the book. I don't know, and I haven't researched it. I don't know if there's another infantry division that had a shorter life than the 106th.
No. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Maybe one of the war-raised ones for the Pacific, for invading Japan over land. I don't know. Well, someone will know.
So this is just a map. I'll show you real quick. You can see Belgium to the far left. The POWs went all the way across Germany, some into Poland, south of Berlin, Dresden. That's all I have here on this part of the 106th, and hopefully I'll come back and tell you more about the POW experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And folks, I should remind you the links to Brian's book are in the description below, as they always are. And we will do that second show about the POWs, but it's as we talked before going live, I'm glad that these units that are often given a footnote, they're the ones that are, effectively a speed bump, slowing down that German advance in the Ardennes, some with great honor and some with real difficulties. But the 28th, the 106th, these other units, I'm glad that they're getting a bit of a reevaluation and a real appreciation for the situation they're in, because you know, all the units that came in that effectively turned around the German advance, they couldn't have done what they did without those hours that those first divisions in the line bought them to get themselves ready. You know, the Patton turning his units around, going up north, Bradley, and all those others, all the decisions they were able to make were because those first couple of days, as you said yourself, the Germans got themselves 2 or 3 days behind schedule very, very quickly on because of these units that stood in their way. So even though they didn't come out themselves being responsible for the eventual victory, they were part of the progress.
Oh yeah, no, it's you know, it really is unfortunate that it took so long for them to get the recognition that they deserve. But you know, they fought as heroically as the 101st. You know, I know the 101st, not to take anything away from the 101st. You know, I think that the Germans, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know all the history, the Germans just bypassed them. The Germans couldn't bypass St. Vith, and they fought to the end. And but I hold the 106th in the same regard that I hold the 101st.
Well, absolutely, and that's a fine way to end it. And the fact is that when you're in service, whether you're serving for the British, Canadians, the Americans, wherever, you don't choose where you go. You get assigned, you go to a unit, and that unit gets deployed somewhere, and a certain series of events will unfold around you, and sometimes they come out on the Allied side with a victory, and sometimes they come out the other way. But you know, you say you don't choose where you go, and we should honor all those who served, because it took everybody to get us through World War II. So Brian, we will make a date for the POW show. I expect it'll be sort of May sometime, but it's been fantastic talking to you again, folks. Don't forget, 2 shows tomorrow, and okay, watch those times because of the clocks going forward. But in the meantime, I'm going to say, everybody, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, people, for your comments and questions. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.